So, very good morning, good evening, one and all. Today, we are here for the panel discussion on indigenous Indian management. The theme of the panel discussion today is Decolonizing Management Knowledge in India, promoting pluri-versalism through indigenous knowledge paradigms. We have Professor Ramya from IIM Calcutta. I'll quickly brief Professor Ramya T. Venkateswaran. She's an associate professor at the Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. She joined academia after completing more than a decade of corporate work experience in India and teaches courses on strategic management, strategy execution, and international business. She's a three-time winner of Best Reviewer Awards at the Academy of Management and has won a Best Instructor Award at the X Culture Project in 2018 among instructors from 37 countries. Welcome you, ma'am, on the campus and for the session. We also have, for the discussion today, a chair and moderator being Professor Ramya and co-chair and moderator Professor Ashish Pandey from SGM SOM IIT Bombay. The panelists are Professor Mahadevan B from IIM Bangalore, Professor Abhay K. Ojha from IIM Bangalore again, Professor Rajan Gupta, retired IIM Lucknow and MDI Gurugram, and Professor Dhan P.S. University of Hawaii at Manoa, USA. We have Professor Rajen and Professor Dhan who will be joining us online. And then we have the other dignitaries and speakers also who are there online for the session. So other than the discussion where all the resource persons and the participants are there, we also have Professor Sushanta Mishra, President INDAM from IIM Bangalore, who is also there, and we are looking forward to more joining in for the session. We are pretty sure it's going to be a very enriching and a lot of insights which we can gather on the theme today. So welcome you, ma'am. Floor is all yours. Thank you.
A very good morning and a warm welcome to my dear fellow scholars of management in India. Thank you so much for the introduction, Professor Ashish Sharma. I stand before you today with a very important agenda of great potential consequence, an agenda born of my own struggles and dilemmas in my journey as an academic, especially as a practitioner turned academic, trying to make a global impact sitting here in India and on India. A struggle or a dilemma that almost everyone in this room is possibly going to come across sooner or later, perhaps. The good news is that, of course, we are not alone, and that the time is ripe to talk about this dilemma openly and honestly. Today is a tremendous opportunity for collective self-reflexivity as management scholars in and on India. We in this room are the creators and producers of management knowledge in the Indian context. But for whom are we creating this knowledge and how? Are the practitioners we know of going gaga and lapping up our paper publications as solutions to their local problems? Are our families and friends finding meaning and pride in our work output? Or is there a silent acceptance, nay dismissal, or unexamined respect for all things academic and learning in our context? Is our research, to quote Professor Rajan Gupta, who's one of our panelists, the matter of distant applause in international conferences, or for the consumption by reviewers and editors of European and American journals, and not particularly of relevance or use to our own local context. Professor Dharam Bhavuk, another one of our eminent panelists, he argues that all knowledge is cultural. All knowledge creation happens as a result of addressing issues in our environment, and therefore it comes from the moorings of our culture, and knowledge is specific to the historical context of a particular society. We in India are a complex civilization with celebrated diversity and complex interdependence in a globalized world. Yet, we are happy with the status quo of testing and validating and nuancing Western theories for explanations to our unique problems. I present to you a model of a combination of traveling theory by Edward Said and a model of universalization of theories by Bodu and Vakant. So in this paper, myself and Professor Abhay Oja argued that knowledge that is created in a particular cultural context, which you can see in the box below, that is in cultural context A, is abstracted into some kind of a model. And when it is abstracted through the process of reductionism, there is a rupture from the context in which this particular knowledge is created. This rupture or this abstraction causes this rupture, and this particular knowledge, when it is this abstraction or the model, when it is applied to another context, it is dehistoricized from this existing context, and it is made into some kind of universal common sense and applied as new knowledge into another cultural context B. And in the process of applying it to this new cultural context B, there is a false universalization. There's a distancing from reality, which is the derealization, which happens to this particular model or to this particular concept or this knowledge. It fails to create true knowledge for the people for whom it truly matters. So it is this process of the dehistoricization and the derealization of knowledge through the false universalization. And this process happens through a system of pressures. This system of pressures and constraints, as Said argues, through which the whole cultural corpus retains its identity. So instead of you have journals, you have reviewers, you have editors, you have publication processes, promotion requirements, the entire academic system that causes this pressure for a certain kind of theorization, a certain kind of approach to knowledge creation, which becomes the universal model and is uniformly applied to all multiple contexts. So instead of this kind of one universal theory or one universal kind of management models to be applied to all different contexts, cultural contexts, can we, instead of universalization, can we acknowledge the possibility of multiple pluriversal truths arising from a plurality of worldviews and multiple cosmologies? Can we shift the center of, or the center of gravity or the locus of knowledge creation from US or Eurocentric knowledge to a recentering for ourselves in this journey? So while we recenter ourselves, we do not dismiss any other sources of knowledge, but at least recognize where we come from. With this context or with this background, I have the privilege to call upon 4 eminent speakers who are trailblazers on this path and who come from different disciplines such as operations management, OB&HRM, strategic management, and have had varied journeys, but all of them have arrived at some common thought patterns. They have varied philosophies, methodologies, and lived experiences, which they are going to share today. So if you look at Professor Mahadevan, so our first speaker today is going to be Professor Ojha. He's going to talk about the decolonial aspect of this particular particular phenomenon that we are observing here, and how can we undo the enduring colonial influence on the Eurocentric perspectives. Professor Mahadevan is going to tell us that it's not so difficult. We already have the knowledge here, right here and now. It's only we just need to discover it and rejuvenate the knowledge that's already existing. So he's going to already share that for us. Professor Dharam Bhavuk is going to share with us the different methods through which we can create constructs, we can create polished models out of the raw models which already exist in our scriptures. How can we do content analysis, and how can we move forward? The time for criticism has ended, and now is the time for us to move forward. And finally, Professor Rajan Gupta is going to share his decade-long of journey, his thoughts, his experiences and his dream for academia and scholarship in India. So with this, I urge you to think about whatever they are going to share today and reflect on your own individual experiences and share with us towards the end when we would like to have a dialogue with the audience. So with this, I have the privilege of introducing our first speaker. Wait a second. So Professor Abhay Oja is the professor of in the area of organization behavior and human resources management at Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. He is, prior to joining IIM Bangalore, he was an assistant professor at Laurentian University in Sudbury in Canada. He has a Bachelor of Technology from IIT Kanpur and a postgraduate diploma from Bombay University, and worked as an engineer in the Bombay division of the Oil and Natural Gas Commission before pursuing doctoral studies in management. He obtained a Doctor of Philosophy in Organizational Analysis from the University of Alberta in Canada. His primary research interest was in organization theory, particularly institutional theory. His current interest is in philosophy of social sciences and examining the colonial roots of knowledge, particularly management knowledge, and nurturing indigenous theories and methods to promote decolonial pluri-versality rather than colonial universality. Welcome, Professor Ojha.
Good morning, folks. Thanks, Ramya. Okay, thank you. So we just sorted out some technical issues, so I'm going to restart. Good morning, and thanks, Ramya, for the introduction. Actually, Bahuk sahab, namaste karna chahiye. Namaste. Thank you. So I'm just going to take off from what Ramya said, and we're going to talk about the sort of undoing the enduring influence of Weber's Eurocentric perspective on India. Sort of at the heart of our effort is to kind of decolonize what is apparently Eurocentric perspectives. And, it's kind of late in the day for us to keep blaming European scholars or European trained scholars or American trained scholars. It's our chance to kind of recognize the shortcomings of the apparent universality of colonial knowledge and build for ourselves. So we kind of, there is concepts in Buddhism and Jain tradition which talks about pluri-versality, and we should go back to those roots and promote pluri-versality. There is no absolute truth. Even in India, we are multiple communities, we are multiple societies. There are certain things that bind us. There are certain things that keep us apart. And to any situation, there are sort of multiple observations, multiple realities, and we should allow for a coexistence of all that, rather than rely on a Western perspective to sort out our issues. So there are three types of colonialization. The third type is very European. There has always been rulers who conquered territories. There have always been people who economically oppressed certain other societies, and that's happening from time immemorial. But the big difference with European colonization is they destroyed the identity of the colonies in which they went. Okay, so no matter where you go, the colonizers describe themselves in the language that was left to them by the colonizers. And that's a tragedy. So colonizing of the political or military kind or the economic kind has been happening for really long. But the intellectual colonization happens only in the European colonization, be it Portuguese, be it Spanish, be it English, be it French. Wherever these people have gone and settled, what we call settler colonies, they have destroyed the identity of the colonies in which they have settled and been so successful that the colonized themselves use the language provided by the colonizers to understand themselves and describe themselves. So we need to dismantle the sort of structures that create and support this knowledge. And since we are at an INDAM forum, in my mind, INDAM has a very strong role to play in dismantling the infrastructure of universal knowledge. I would sorry to say, I think there's a long way to go before INDAM actually makes an impact in that context. Right now, I think we have not been able to make enough of an impact. I hope going forward, INDAM will play a significant role in dismantling the structures that perpetuate universal knowledge, which is largely Eurocentric. We're promoting decoloniality. This does not mean that we will abandon Western knowledge or Eurocentric knowledge, but we will definitely try to create a fracture. When we borrow Western knowledge, we should remember that we are borrowing from the West. When we borrow Japanese knowledge, we should remember we are borrowing knowledge from Japan, and we should continue. So we should be rooted in our knowledge, which is indigenous. But if we have to refine it, improve it, find alternate perspective, we should be open to borrowing. Right now, my allegation is most Indian scholars are not even aware that they are borrowing Eurocentric perspectives. They're very conscious when they borrow from Japan, they call it Japanese management. They're very conscious when they borrow from China, they call it Chinese management. But when they borrow from Europe and the US, they think it's universal. That's the centerpiece. We would want to eradicate that and make the centerpiece indigenous knowledge while we continue to borrow from other countries. So in the traveling theory concept that Ramya talked about, essentially parsimony is a strength of a theory. When we look at very complex things and we try to focus on a few issues, that gives us the understanding of that phenomena that we are trying to understand. Unfortunately, that parsimony to understand a complex phenomena in one context doesn't translate to a very other context which has its own different complexity. Unfortunately, universal theories do that. And just going to play on Albert Einstein's quote, which says, everything should be made simple as possible, but not simpler. And I think application of Western knowledge has seated the complex society of India in a very simplistic fashion. We've lost a lot of understanding of our own society because we have relied on Western perspectives to understand our own society. I'm going to talk about a very delicate topic, caste in India. I'm not trying to deny the existence of caste in India as today. I'm not trying to suggest that it is an institution which should not modify or should not change. But I also want to place with you that the current understanding that prevails in the academic literature and to some extent has spilled into society is a very racist perspective that was created by colonizers. So Weber, Marx, and Durkheim, all of them were implicitly racist. They assume that Europe has arrived at a level of development that should be transferable to the other societies. They've always evaluated other societies from, they've differed among themselves. Durkheim, Marx, and Weber have played among themselves, but they held a high ground and everyone else had to participate in that debate. Even in India, we talk about the left, we talk about the right, as if no other way of understanding the complexity of society and how we are supposed to go. The right means capitalism and the left means Marxism. I think there are multiple ways of looking at society and we should look at that. Now, some of us who read the English literature might not be aware how racist Max Weber was, because it's a translation that we read. Zimmerman and others who can access the German in which he originally wrote find it very difficult to understand how Weber is presented as this liberal scholar. The roots of how we understand caste today is based on the colonial period. There are three categories of people: the Orientalists, the missionaries, and the administrators. They came to the country for different reasons. On margins, they differed with each other on some issues. But on the issue of caste, the interests aligned. The Orientalists wanted to capture this quaint society, which seemed to be in their mind illiberal and upset. So they painted a picture of Indian society which fits their own agenda of describing a quaint society. The missionaries had their own agenda. I'm not putting particular blame on the missionaries that were here, but they really wanted to save a pagan population or heathen population. And in the process, they found that the caste was the biggest impediment, or the endogamous groups were the biggest impediment to. So they had their own reasons why they wanted to describe this society as a caste society. And of course, the administrators, they had their own reasons. They wanted a book to control this society. So they found that for the people of the Islamic faith. They found that for the people of the Christian faith. And when they looked at what they would use for the rest of the population, they found a document sections of the document called Manusmriti, and so they have played around with Varna. I mean, I'm not a Sanskrit scholar, but I understand there are different meanings of Varna, and no reference to color of the skin was made when people were talked about Varna. But it's the racist perspective that Risley brought in, because racism was the way to look at societies in the West. He quite quickly looked at Varna as meaning color of the skin, and found Jati as some representation of that, which is horrific, because I think today a lot of an average Indian uses these concepts to understand themselves, which is actually far from the truth. There has been no reference to caste in India till the Portuguese arrived. We use the word caste so loosely today. There has been no reference to caste in India till the Portuguese arrived. Megasthenes has come and he has talked about a 7-layer society. Al-Burani has come, he has talked about a 7-layer system. It's only when Barbosa comes, he starts noticing this color-based system in our society. And you can see that Megasthenes, of course, he's from Europe, but he's a pre-racist. European colonization has not started. Al-Burani is from the east, from the west of our country, but again, he's not of racist thinking, so he doesn't see race here. As soon as the European arrives, because the scientifically expected thing was racism, they looked at us and found race here. Cox kind of makes a mockery of this thinking. He says, white men, you can read it for yourself. It's kind of a caricature. He says, this is not how societies work. You have to give more rationality and thinking ability to those societies you look at. I mean, things are not as simple. The whole problem with the world, and this is, I'm quoting a Western philosopher, but fanatics are so certain about themselves. When people, wiser people, have so much full of doubts. So I'm trying to create some doubts about the caste system in India. So 5 alternative perspectives. So the first one is Babasaheb Ambedkar, who himself comes from a disadvantaged group. If you see the quote that is there, he says it's a gross perversion of facts if you describe castes as a system of race. Here, in his mind, endogamy is at the heart of it, and endogamy in combination with exogamy, which is people want to marry amongst themselves, but also prevent somebody from marrying across these endogamous groups. That's where the root of the caste system is. And again, he's not a big fan of the system as he understood it, but he's definitely clear that it's not a race-based system. It's a society that has divided itself probably unfairly, but it's not based on race. Dumont, at some stage, this must be this difference between French scholarship and German scholarship and even English scholarship. He chose to take a very different view of this. And I'm not necessarily agreeing with him, but his argument was that this obsession of the European to go and overthrow knowledge of other societies and impose his view, his values on whatever he saw, is at the heart of targeting Indian society based on caste. He gave a functional explanation that in an individualistic society, the workplace created the hierarchy. So in larger society, you treated everyone equal. When you went into the workplace, you created a hierarchy. He says Asian societies in general, and India in particular, have created some kind of a hierarchy in the social system such that you do not have to address this in the workplace. You may agree with him, not agree with him. The fact is, it's an alternate view of how do you look at the caste system in India, and is different from how whoever left you to think. Now we have another scholar, Battle. He's of course he's an Indian, born in India. He has some French heritage, but he is the one who has been immersed in Indian society, and he says there is no evidence that there is race as a basis of any kind of segmentation in Indian society. In fact, when he's talking about nasal index and etc., he's actually poking fun at Risley, who use the measurement of the nose and the measurement of the skull as so-called scientific and objective information to categorize India into caste. He failed. To his credit, he acknowledges all the failures in his book, but the simplistic understanding is what Weber has picked up and taken it forward. So, in fact, Patale gives a very positive explanation to why castes exist in India. He says, as people migrate, as the economic conditions change, the caste system or the endogamous system has allowed each community to retain its religious practices, its cultural practices, its food habits, and coexist. So rather than be an antagonistic system, it is actually a cooperative system which allows you to retain your identities even as you cooperate. And he sees this as a strength of the system. And the Western world is talking about mosaic and talking about a melting pot. Indian society has been a melting pot or a mosaic for really long, because you could fit into the system, have your own worldviews, food habits, and we could coexist together. Quigley has an even different take. He says there's a tension between. So when people settle and there's a specialization of work that happens, castes emerge, or sort of segregation of activities emerge. His work is done in Nepal, actually, and he kind of suggests that in the Kathmandu Valley, where lots of people, it's a economically, agriculturally rich area, people have settled. Naturally, activities get segregated. Some people specialize in it, and castes emerge. If you go into the distant hills, there's no castes because everyone does everything. So he kind of says it's actually just fact that when people settle, some people do things better, and work division is the basis of caste. The last one I will talk to you about is Konlon, who's kind of He's the American scholar. He's written a lot. He says sort of at the heart of this system is what is called a Baradari. Baradari consists of the most local community that hobnob with each other on a regular basis and form the community. Then next comes the Jati, which is where a larger group of people who sort of maybe intermarry. And then there's a caste identity, which is a Jat identity. And he says the Jat identity did not exist before the colonizers came. When the colonizers came and destroyed the local social structures, then people had developed a Jat identity. So he actually blames British intervention for, and of course the census and all, I don't want to get into details of that, for creating a Jat identity which did not exist before. It was all a very, very local identity. So in conclusion, I'm telling you that, we are using Western notion to even understand ourselves. There are flaws in that. Maybe I've given you 5 alternatives. You might not agree with all of them. Just to let you know that there are other ways of looking at yourself. If we can look at our own ways and sort of counter the simplistic understanding that Weber has left in the English-speaking management literature, we'll be better off. Thank you.
I next call upon Professor B. Mahadevan, who is a professor of operations management at the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, where he has been teaching since 1992. He was the founding vice chancellor of Chinmaya Vishwa Vidyapeeth, a university for Sanskrit and Indic knowledge. He was also the Dean Administration of IIM Bangalore and member of the governing board of IIMB for 4 years. Professor Mahadevan is also on the board of IIM Kashipur, IIT Madras, and Kendriya Vidyalaya Sangathan. Professor Mahadevan has more than 30 years of wide-ranging experience in teaching, research, consulting, and academic administration at IIM Bangalore and other reputed institutions such as IIT Delhi and XLRI Jamshedpur. He was earlier the chief editor for the IIMD Management Review, the IIMD in-house journal, and the EADS SMI chair professor for sourcing and supply chain management from at IIM Bangalore. He was a visiting scholar at the Amos Tuck School of Business Administration at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire between 1999 to 2000. He was also a retainer consultant to Deloitte Consulting LLP USA in 2001 to 2002. Professor Mahadevan is a member of the editorial board of the Production and Operations Management Journal and the International Journal of Business Excellence. He served in the editorial board of Six Sigma and Competitive Advantage. He is also on the International Advisory Board for California Management Review. His areas of interest include business models for internet-based e-commerce, supply chain and contracting issues in e-markets, design of customer co-production services, and most popularly, management paradigms from the Bhagavad Gita and Indian knowledge systems, concepts and applications. Welcome, Professor Mahadevan.
Thank you, Ramya, and let me also thank INDAM and Ramya for organizing this wonderful panel discussion. I think this is a very good beginning. We may have to cover a lot of ground, that's okay, but I'm happy that there is. That's okay. So what I am going to do is very quickly, since the panel discussion, I want to throw some issues and leave it, so that we can have a bit of a discussion on things that we might possibly want to. Now, if you look at management practices world over, not just India, there are very, very important fault lines. I'll just name only 2, not more than that. First thing is, all over the world, people are saying there is a deprived meaning at workplace. This is a universal phenomenon. And our whole research in the last, our modern management is about 150 years probably. It seems to be a work in progress. We don't know how to address that. The problem only gets little, complicated as we go along. Workplace, no meaning at workplace, job stress, burnout. So we do a lot of research, and still it looks like this is a big pointer to what we need to do about management, both in terms of practice, education, and research. The other one which I would like to flag, although there are many more, I just took two for want of time. I'm making everything very short. And the sustainability challenges are threatening business practices and will threaten the society if we go the way we are going. This is again a big fault line, and I do not know, in the last 10 years, 15 years, we have taken some steps, but I don't think they're really addressing sustainability in a very direct fashion. So like this, there are at least about half a dozen issues I can flag in management practice. And the question now is, how do we look at this? Do we push the existing thought by a few more steps and see what we can do? Or we should open up and see, are there any alternative ways by which we can address this problem? I think this is something very real which we need. So I want to start with this. Now, if you are saying that if the current management education and research is about 150 years in a very formal sense, but common sense tells us that management is as old as rocks and rivers. Because if there are people, there are challenges, there is management. I don't think we need to think that what happened in the last 200 years in terms of whatever we theorized and whatever we wrote is all that we know about management, and that's all probably we have to draw upon. I think that to me appears to be not a very nice suggestion and a good assumption to make. So there comes the question of why can't we look at the Indian knowledge systems? So what I would do is I would quickly share a few of my personal experiences. The first thing is about, I think 9 years back, I started a 3-credit course in IIM Bangalore saying called Management Paradigms from Bhagavad Gita. And every year I have 2 sections, about 150 plus students. It looks like there is a certain ground for us to actually operate in a very, very profitable way, in the sense of exchanging interesting information, thinking about the issues that ancient Indian wisdom can possibly provide to us. So this is something which is the first experience that I want to bring. Second thing is I took about 2 years and then wrote up on what is called Indian knowledge systems. And I must tell you that in fact, the journey of going through the process of identifying what Indian knowledge system was far more valuable than what was written finally in the form of a book. And it was a great revelation personally to me that there is enormous amount of very valuable piece of knowledge which are there, which were just discarded about 200 years back. Abruptly and bluntly, it was just thrown out. In fact, every one of us who want to seriously get back to Indian knowledge systems, as a starter, we should read 5 volumes of Dharampal. Dharampal wrote a beautiful treatise on education. He wrote on science and technology. He wrote what happened in the 18th century when Britishers came in a big way and then completely disturb the existing system. Absolutely informing account of what you can see India was in 1800. That can be a very good starter to actually read. Now, although my book on Indian knowledge system was on a variety of things, astronomy, math, engineering, so many things, but I will confine myself to some of the very interesting areas of management which lie unexplored, both from teaching and research. First thing is, it is eminently possible, from whatever I have read, I'm in the process of thinking through it, it is eminently possible that we can create what an organization must look like give a structure to an organization. Our understanding of what an organization is informed by the Western and Eurocentric approach today. For example, at least I will name two. There is one Upanishad called Prashnopanishad. And the third chapter of Prashnopanishad, if people read, they will understand what are the vital functions that are required for any organization, whether it is for profit or not for profit, business, government or any social kind of organization. There are interesting ideas in chapter 3. In fact, Arthashastra is something which is extraordinarily brilliant in terms of bringing very nice things about. I think we have delayed a lot of, we have waited for a much longer time. I think it's very important that every business school in this country starts teaching Arthashastra. There are wonderful ideas of management cutting across disciplines. For example, salary structure from 40 panas. Pana is the unit of currency at that time. One pana is the value of a certain weight of silver, actually. From 40 panas to 40,000 panas, the complete organization structure is available, and 39 directorates are there to administer. There are 7 prakritis which characterize any organization. It's called Sapta Prakriti. I mean, I can go on and on and on. I think it's time we look at these, both from research and from teaching. If you want to really understand some nuances of financial management, public finance, public administration, and taxation, Arthashastra is the place to go. Again, a very extensive thought process, very extensive detailed recommendations. What separates Arthashastra from all other scriptures is the level of detail. It's not a very generic kind of a statement. Such a level of detail. For example, there is a directorate of weights and measures. In chapter book 2, 19th chapter and 20th chapter is all about weights and measures. Book 2 is the biggest book. 1/5 of Arthashastra is book 2, which is all about how do you administer. It's all about management. In these 2 chapters, he says what kind of measuring pans, tolas, are to be manufactured in what sizes, how often we need to calibrate, how the Directorate of Weights and Measures must put in place a system of calibration. How do you ensure that they are calibrated, and if the people don't calibrate, what kind of penalty has to be administered in which form? That's a lot of detail in everything. This is something extraordinary. I think Arthashastra is extremely important. If you talk of authenticity, if you want to talk of psychology, if you want to talk of human behavior, let me tell you, I think the greatest repository or which is lying without today is being used by people for Harikatha and other purposes. Our 6 darshanas and Upanishads are copious material on human psychology, communication, behavior. All that we can actually pull out very good material, both for research and teaching. The Upanishads and the darshanas are absolutely marvelous when it comes to talking about psychology. So there are some unique aspects of Indian psychology which you can actually see there, and it's time we actually bring it out. If you want to talk about communication, whether it is, in fact, the current trend is non-verbal communication. If you want to really understand non-verbal communication, I would recommend we must read Bharata's Natya Shastra and Kama Sutra. Absolutely nice piece of work in which how one needs to communicate, what is the science and mechanism behind making communication effective. If you want those ideas, they are available there. It looks like we have not been able to tap these kind of resources. So actually the question is, these are some examples. I just threw a few examples just to sort of tell you that IKS has enormous, in the Indian knowledge system has enormous material which is waiting to be read, waiting to be tapped and brought out in a very realistic way. At the moment, I am offering an elective on Indian knowledge systems in IIM Bangalore. Some 60 students have taken. Based on my book, I have an elective and about 60 students are actually taken. It's a very interesting journey that I am also going through in the process and so on. So let me leave a few thoughts on what should we do specifically in terms of where can we take some of these forward. Okay. First thing is, I think I see there is a lot of scope, potential for what I call as a wholesome conceptualization of an enterprise. from the principles of IKS. I have, some preliminary thoughts shaping up. If there are people, I think we should get together. I am very happy to work with people. We can create, how does an organization look like? How should we conceptualize an organization? There are very interesting ideas that I have seen. Been thinking about it. Maybe we should really, bring that. It's one area in which we can create what an enterprise must look like. What are the, just to give you, what is the goal of an organization? If you say the goal of the organization is to make profit, people will just laugh at you. 40 years back, you can say that. There is one HBS book written in 2000 called The Living Organization. And the study was based on the executive director of Shell studied. He said Shell is 400-year-old company. I want to know how long companies will live. What he found was 40% of all newly formed companies die within 10 years. The 1/3 of Fortune 500 companies of 1970 did not exist in 1980. So that's not the goal of the organization. If you want to ask me what is the goal of the organization, you have to start from a word called dharma. The Indian word dharma comes from a Sanskrit root dhrui, dharane. Dharane means that which can behold or support. In fact, in Mahabharata, in Karna Parva, there is a beautiful shloka. Dharana dharma ityahuhu dharmo dharayate jagat. Yad dharana sanyuktam sadharma iti nischitah. That alone which has an ability to sustain. Today we talk so much about sustainability. So we can start the goal of our organization from principles of dharma. So we can fix many parameters of how should a future organization look like. I just gave an example of one. I see many patterns of these actually existing in our scriptures. Why can't we put together and say this is how an organization for the future must look like? This is what they should go about. This is their goal. This is how they, the whole process of innovation can be so beautifully explained. But I was a retainer for Deloitte, Chicago and New Jersey for about 2 years on a work called business model innovation. The first day, we used to meet every week. First day, virtually. So they will send me a PPT on Wednesday, I'll send a PPT on Friday, and Saturday we'll have a meeting. So I sent a PPT with just one slide. I called it as Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva and sent it to them. So we had a very interesting discussion. The final white paper, I see Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva there. We have completely brought it. I said that if Joseph Schumpeter said that, innovation through creative destruction, the comfort there is creative destruction. It's called Shiva Tattva. Shiva is called Mangala in India. Shiva is called Shankar. Sam karoti iti Shankar. Sham bhavati iti Shambho. Good things will happen only when you destroy mindset, when you destroy. It's called creative destruction. So we have a model of how we sustain organization as a workable model we can create. So like this, I can go on. I'm not going to. I just wanted to sort of give. I think psychology, human behavior, motivation, work and joy is completely open. We have come one full circle. The current methodology of working with incentives is not just going to take us anywhere. We should get into karma yoga and then conceptualize it so well. How work, joy, and all that can be beautifully weaved into a mechanism of how do you actually deal with work. This is an area which we need to really study in terms of research, in terms of education, and so on. Another area in which I think the Western knowledge system cannot at all penetrate is what I call as world insight, inner joy, understanding inner self, and authenticity. This entirely belongs to the Eastern tradition. It doesn't belong to the Western tradition, unfortunately. So I think this is an area where we need to, because Peter Sinjay's articles I'm reading, it says, inner joy, a lot of words coming like that. But they are not able to, beyond mindfulness meditation, they have not been able to penetrate. This is an area we need to work. I think we should take these areas seriously and work. Of course, sustainability. There is Rig Veda, you will find a lot of material on, not only India, I think all 3,000 plus year old civilizations believed in a very sustainable living. We have a scripture fortunately with us, so therefore we can draw out from that. I'll end with only a few thoughts on what are some of the issues and challenges going forward. I think I would like this to be very seriously also thought about. The first thing I see is, I see a huge problem when it comes to IKS research. The problem is, while if you want to do a research in, let's say, psychology or financial economics, you read well. You develop competency before you actually start working. Whereas we seem to have a license without knowing anything, people jump into IKS and even come to a conclusion that, this is useless, this is not good, this is not good. I will never teach anesthesia because I am not an expert in anesthesia. But it looks like this is, out of interest, they do it, but I want to caution. I think it is very important that a sensible, a responsible Indian must invest on one scripture, go into the depth of it. I don't want you to read all of them, because without that, we're not going to really make an impact. And this is one big challenge we have to watch out. I just want to caution. Second thing is, so that leads to the domain knowledge of Indian scriptures. It's extremely important. Unless we invest on only the domain knowledge, not worry about what are we going to get out of it. We need to worry about the domain knowledge of Indian scriptures, and that kind of an effort must seriously go in as a second part. The third challenge I see is there is a huge challenge in communicating our thoughts and our ideas. There is no vehicle. In fact, I wrote a paper along with one of my colleagues in which we use the Ashrama Dharma. We use the Ashrama Dharma concept, the 4 ashramas, and we actually address the problem of succession planning in family-owned businesses. The paper was outright rejected, and I don't see personally, there can be still a certain bias. I can see that I was absolutely upset with the nature of comments. It was in a special group, MSR. It's not even in a general thing. Management, Spirituality, Religion, Group of Academy of Management. The referee reports informed a lot to me. I don't think we should use some lens and then try to write this. This is we are doing out of necessity. Please don't do it. I don't think we should use some lens and then cut all corners and then bring all those references and somehow publish. This will get us very poor. And that brings us to a very important question. Within the next 5 years, if we don't form a special interest group and create a good open source journal in which on our terms we evaluate our research and push our research, Indian knowledge system cannot be brought into research and publication given the madness with which all IIMs are going after this A-star and UT Dallas 20 listing and all that. We will never get our work out because other people are simply not equipped. They're not interested even to give it a fair thought. I think these are some of the issues. I thought I'll just leave these issues. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Professor Mahadevan. Next in line, we have Professor Dhan P.S. He is the Professor of Management and Culture and Community Psychology at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, USA. He has joined us online today. His research interests include indigenous psychology and management, with focus on India and Nepal, and cross-cultural training. He has a BTech honors in mechanical engineering from IIT Kharagpur in 1979, an MBA from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and a PhD from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He is the author of the book Indian Psychology, Lessons from the Bhagavad Gita, and co-editor of the books Indigenous Indian Management, Conceptualization, Practical Applications, and Pedagogical Initiatives, along with Ashish Pandey, who is also here, and Professor Pawan Budhwar. Cambridge Handbook of Intercultural Training with Dan Landis, Barriers and Opportunities at the Base of the Pyramid, published by UNDP Istanbul International Center for Private Sector in Development, and Asian Contributions to Cross-Cultural Psychology with Janak Pandey and Durgaram Sinha. He has published more than 110 papers and book chapters and made over 250 presentations internationally. He has regularly presented at the National Academy of Psychology in India. He is involved with other Indian academics in the Indian psychology movement and also in the Indian management movement. He has taught in China between 2015 to 2019, in New Zealand in 2002, and Nepal in 2002 as a visiting professor. He is a founding fellow of the International Academy of Intercultural Research. He is a fellow of the Indian Academy of Management. He is a foreign fellow of National Academy of Psychology in India and was F. Smith Richardson Junior Visiting Fellow, Center for Creative Leadership, Greensboro in North Carolina in 2009 to 2010, and recipients of many, many awards. So a very warm welcome, Professor Bhavuk, and over to you.
Can I screen share?
Yes. Yeah, but I think I should mute from here and
Can you see me now? You can see me and hear me. Give me a thumbs up. Namaste. It's an honor to be on this panel of very like-minded people. I've known Professor Mahadevan for some time. I've known Dr. Ojha for some time, known Dr. Gupta for a long time, and Dr. Ramya for some time. I'm so excited to hear Dr. Mahadevan and Dr. Ojha. I was also laughing actually when he was giving me joy. So thank you, Dr. Mahadevan, and thank you, Dr. Ojha. This is a really good feeling. I wanted to share my journey, and I'm timing myself, so hopefully I will talk fast. So after my graduation from IIT Kharagpur in '79, I was an engineer, a manager, solving problems. What frustrated me most in those days was when the elders in my organization, I worked for Nepal Airlines, would say, what are the Indians doing in Indian Airlines, in Air India? What is Lufthansa doing? I'm like, you send me to IIT, I got a degree, I'm supposed to solve problems, not look what other jokers are doing. Very frustrating. I also used Western management, which I had learned in IIT in my management and operations research course. And I was like, we'll never do well because we don't use proper management. And then I came to America in '87 at the East-West Center, and everything changed. I immediately knew what was wrong with everything I was doing and other people were doing. We were ignoring our cultural knowledge and wisdom. So that is the gift I got from cross-cultural psychology. And I worked with Dr. Richard Brislin. In fact, the first book, when I met him, he gave me Culture's Consequences by Hofstede and said, go read it and then we'll talk. So you can see that I started very well in '87 with Hofstede's book and working with Dr. Brislin. So I basically became a cross-cultural psychologist. I came back to Nepal and worked for 2 years, and I think I did a few things that was culturally appropriate. I was able to get things done. And there are a lot of war stories from the front line. And so I think understanding culture is important. And that's why international business pays attention to it. I moved to the USA in '92 January, did my PhD with Dr. Triandis, who is a founder of cross-cultural psychology. And I've never looked back. I defined myself as a second-generation cross-cultural psychologist, and I don't apologize for what I do. So that was from '92 to '99, when I got invited to write a paper in the honor of Dr. Durganand Sinha. And because for part of my Swadhyaya, I study Bhagavad Gita, I saw a model in Bhagavad Gita, and so I just wrote it up and sent it, to the special issue published in India. And slowly, I just kind of moved into indigenous Indian psychology and management. So from '99 onwards, I actually stopped defining myself as a cross-cultural psychologist. I'm a cultural psychologist, a cultural researcher. And I also believe that all human problems are too complex to be solved by any discipline. We have to have interdisciplinary approach. And that's why, I'm a researcher. So give me culture, I'm excited. You take culture out, I'm not interested. So most of the Western management literature is actually without culture, or they have only Western culture. As Dr. Ojha said, we should call it Western management. We should call it Western psychology. Professor Triandis in 1994 in the Handbook of IO Psychology, 4th edition, wrote that we are imposing the psychology of 1% of the population onto 99% of the people in the world. This is a Greek-American psychologist saying in 1994 in the mainstream Handbook of Industrial Organizational Psychology. I don't think we have paid enough attention. So I'm happy to be an Indian psychologist, management researcher, and I'm grateful to everybody in this room. I have worked with most people, and INDAM is doing great. And NAOP has actually now a division called Indian Psychology Division, and INDAM has a division also on Indian psychology and cultural things, which I hope will continue in the future. So early on, I realized that we criticize the Western management and psychology, but we don't offer anything ourselves. So what would they talk about? So I said, okay, I need to start developing constructs and models and theories. So here's a list of things that I have done over the years. So I've been blessed with the Bhagavad Gita, and so it is part of my daily Swadhyay. I chant chapter 12 every day, the first thing when I get up after remembering the 12, Jyotirlingas. So it is part of me. And I also have now over the years realized that even in the West, there is a tradition of dialoguing with the book. So Gadamer talks about how we actually, when we read a book, we are interacting with the author. And in our tradition, Chinmayanandaji said, he chided his disciples when they said, Guruji, when you were traveling internationally, we went through the Upanishads. And he said, you morons, you don't go through the Upanishad. You allow the Upanishads to go through you. So this is the methodology I learned about this in, from one of my good friends, Acharya Satya Chaitanya. He was a direct disciple. He is a direct disciple of Chinmayanandaji. And he shared this in 2005-06 when I met him. And it has been with me. And so when I study the Indian text, I know it that in the beginning, I am going through the text. But with Shraddha and Swadhyay and doing it regularly, then the text starts talking to me. And this is what Gadamer talks about, the dialogue with the speaker or the writer of the book. So there is Western tradition. Gadamer is a Western philosopher. So it's not only in our tradition. So this idea of having a dialogue with the text, and I want to detour what Dr. Mahadevan recommended, that we need to spend time with one text for a long time. And I'm going to stick to Bhagavad Gita all my life. And then I'm also learning and studying some other texts. So this is important commitment. So thanks to Bhagavad Gita, I have recognized a lot of models. The concept of self, chapter 3, Sri Krishna kind of gives in one sloka what is the concept of self. So the Indriyas are inferior to the Manas, which is inferior to the Buddhi, which is inferior to, he doesn't use inferior, he says superior, reverse order to that, the Atman. So there is Atman, there is Buddhi, there is Manas, and there are the senses. That's the Indian model of self. One advantage of studying Bhagavad Gita and doing research on it is that you can get away with a lot of claims because I'm not saying it, Sri Krishna is saying it. So in this slok, he doesn't use the word ahankara. After years of reflection, I'm still in the position of the mind that we don't need ahankara. If we focus on understanding human psychology, we can actually bypass ahankara and just deal with manas and buddhi and atman, which is the self, and the senses. And when you think about it, each of our senses at least the Jnanendriyas, are a dominant paradigm for a business. So ear, music industry, nose, fragrance industry, tongue, food industry, skin, garment industry, and eyes, video, travel, and you combine video and audio, and then you have the video games, and no wonder it is that addictive, because it takes 2/5 of our consciousness. Okay, I have 6 minutes. I'm basically going to give you an overview of the constructs I have been working on. So by developing models from the Bhagavad Gita, which already exists. So the idea is study the text, see a model. If it strikes you as a model, write it up, and don't worry about where it gets published. It will get published somewhere. So the theory of self is already there in Atma, Manas, Buddhi, Ahankar, and in chapter 13, he brings Sankhya Yoga again. Sankhya Darshan, and so we have Ahankar also and other things. In chapter 2, we already have a theory of Krodha, and I only took the first verse, one verse, and I saw it as a model of how anger is created. But 15 years later, only last year, I wrote up a theory of Krodha, and it is really fascinating how the West does not have a model of Krodha or anger. With all the research done on aggression, they actually do not have a theory like the one that Bhagavad Gita offers. I worked on Shanti or peace, and that became part of one of the chapters in my book in 2011. But since 2011, I have been picking up constructs. So I have now a few papers on Lajja. And Lajja is not shame, it is not guilt. It is both shame and guilt in different contexts and used differently. Lajja is our internal guide that tells us what to do and tells us what not to do. If we don't experience Lajja, we are not sensitive. But Lajja is a fleeting bhava, sanchari bhava. It runs away very quickly. That basically means we become shameless. So we should not insult our elders, but if we don't pay attention, we'll end up insulting them, and then we'll keep insulting them. Adhyatma, I have 2 papers on it, and I still don't understand it. I'm still working on it. Even the model in Bhagavad Gita is too complex for me still. And I have read 7 commentaries and still not. So I also have a feeling that the text kind of becomes part of you, but it takes time. Lok Sangraha is easier, but it's prevalent in India. Everybody talks about Lok Sangraha, and that is a leadership model. But if we start with leadership, we'll never come to Lok Sangraha. We'll be stuck in the Western literature. Shraddha came out of my displeasure with the translation of Shraddha as faith. And again, I've used the Bhagavad Gita to derive Shraddha, and there are so many aspects of it which doesn't come out if we only think about faith. I also study Kabir Das ji, and I used about 100 of his dohas to define what is prema or love. And again, love and prema is definitely translatable, but the concept of prema, the way Kabir Das ji presents, is not what we understand on a daily basis. And so therefore, it's really worthwhile looking at our own tradition. I have a paper on tapas, and that should help us understand emotional intelligence. In fact, tapas is more relevant than emotional intelligence. I think emotional intelligence is oxymoron because it captures emotion and affect, emotion and cognition, which basically can't be integrated in Western psychology, whereas tapas makes sense. We can understand the tapas of a housewife, homemaker. We can understand the tapas of a student. We can understand the tapas of a king, a CEO. And there's so much to appreciate, both in management and in daily life. I've also written a paper called Sadhu Marg, where I look at how Pramukh Swami of Swaminarayan Sampradaya has led. And this kind of is an interesting way of looking at, how leadership is lok sangraha based, is other focused rather than self-focused. I can't get into the models, and I'll basically mention that. So there is a theory of self, which, Atman, Manas, Buddhi, Ahankar, etc. Theory of Krodha is in chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita. Theory of Karma is in chapter 3. And there is more out there. And these help us understand better. So I'm out of time, so I think I'm going to simply say that there's a methodology that we can follow. We can start by examining dictionary meanings, synonyms, antonyms, and then go into the texts and see what they say. And we can use Bhagavad Gita, Durga Saptashati, Ramayana of Tulsidas, Rudrashtadhyayi, Guru Granth Sahib, Sukhmani Sahib, the Holy Quran. In fact, I've been working with my student from Saudi Arabia, and then analyzing its issues in the literature. And so I have used this method for Lajja, and I'm working on other constructs. So there is a way to study Indian constructs. As a researcher, I think we should know ourselves. We are the most important resource, and our experience is valid, and we should know our culture. So we need to study the classic literature, watch movies, plays, and because culture shapes everything, if we pay attention to ourselves and our culture, we will be able to get a handle of, Indian concepts and ideas. So my final message is stop criticizing Western psychology and management. That's not enough. Criticizes, but that's not enough. So we need to deliver indigenous constructs, models, and theories. So we need to go back to our own texts, our own people, our own proverbs, and then employ a suitable methodology. I think I'm over time, so I should stop here. And
Thank you, Professor Babuk. Would you be able to stop the screen sharing?
yes, oh, it's a good point. Hold on. Where did I get lost? Stop, resume share. Why can't I find my stop
Yeah, I think
share?
it's fine.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Babuk, and namaskar. We now have Professor Rajan Gupta as the last panelist for today before we move on to the Q&A. Professor Rajan Gupta was a research advisor at IIM Sirmaur during 2020-22. Before that, he was a professor of human behavior and organization development at MDI Gurgaon during 1997 to 2016, and IIM Lucknow for 10 years. He also spent a year as a visiting professor at Rotterdam School of Management at the Netherlands. He is a professional member of the Indian Society of Applied Behavioral Science and a founding member of the National HRD Network and the Strategic Management Forum. He has a first degree in electrical engineering from IIT Kanpur and later did his doctorate in management from IIM Ahmedabad. Before joining the doctoral program in IMA, he had worked as a probationary officer in SBI for over 2 years. After completing his doctorate, he worked for over 4 years as a corporate HRD manager in Jyoti Limited, an engineering company in Vadodara, after which he joined on the faculty of IIM Lucknow. Academically, he has a special interest in the linkage between Indian culture and management and the need for doing useful and rigorous research. He has 4 books and over 100 scientific publications to his credit. His co-edited book on qualitative research and management was released by Sage Publishers in March 2015. He has been on the international editorial boards of a number of journals during the last 19 years at MDI, and he was on a number of journals. And during the last 19 years at MDI, he has been very deeply involved in the doctoral program at MDI. He continuously taught doctoral courses and guided students. Over a dozen of them, some of who are already in this room, have completed their doctorate. His current main passion is to help young scholars to do exciting, creative, and useful research. Thank you so much, Professor Rajan Gupta. Over to you.
Ramya, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Now tell me, how much time do I have? And I can tell you one thing. I have also prepared myself for speaking only one sentence. Powerful enough. So tell me, what is the time frame you have?
So it depends on how long that sentence is.
No, that means because you said the session is up to 11:30 and this
Yes,
is
so we
11:20.
are extending. The Zoom is extended till 12. So we can extend a bit because we have been delayed in the beginning, and we also have Q&A at the end. So please go ahead, sir.
Okay, so I'll be very brief. I think Ramya, you began with a wonderful introduction of the theme. Then Professor Ojha gave a beautiful and a very focused presentation on the most troubling idea about Indian society. And I think he has tried to unravel it and deconstruct it beautifully. Professor Mahadevan has given a beautiful picture of the Indian knowledge systems. And Professor Bhavuk definitely has shown how one stream of research that needs to be done and how it can be done. So I think given the shortage of time, I will not repeat any of those things. I hope I have something more to say. I am not using a PPT. I have never used a PPT in my life so far and been able to manage. So what I will say is just a few things. One, just to echo what has been said by my co-panelists, I gave up criticizing Western scholars and Western management somewhere in 1993 when I was a visiting professor in Rotterdam School of Management. I must say to start with, I as a management scholar owe a great deal to the European scholarship in philosophy and social science and American scholarship in the field of management. I have learned a great deal from them. Am I audible, Professor Bhavuk?
Yes.
Okay. I thought you
very clear. Very clear. Thank you.
Something was taking away your attention. Maybe I'm becoming a classroom teacher.
Oh, no, I was checking my notes too.
Okay.
I'm taking notes, so that's why my eye movement is away from you.
Okay, thank you. Now, I will just give two arguments why we need to do creative and useful research for ourselves in India. The first reason is that we have a difference of worldview between Europe and America on the one hand and India on the other. If you look at it from the philosophical point of view, if I take the ontological view, I think there is a very sharp and important difference between the modern Western worldview and the Indian worldview, the Vedic worldview. I think I would rather than using Indian and Hindu, I would prefer Vedic because that is what I understand a little bit. So ontologically, in the Vedic worldview, consciousness precedes matter. In Western worldview, matter precedes consciousness. And I think this is such a huge difference in the worldview that everything else gets affected. Secondly, axiologically, while the modern West has focused on material success as the ultimate goal of human life, Vedic tradition definitely acknowledges material progress as an important goal, but that is not the ultimate goal. I think that to me is an extremely important axiological difference. And if we accept the ontological difference, the epistemological difference also raises its head. If we say consciousness is prior to matter, then the whole Western science is insufficient to appreciate the Vedic perspective. So this to me is the philosophical difference between India and the modern Western worldview. I'm not going into the ancient West. There could be debate around that. Secondly, there is a difference at the cultural level, and Professor Bhavuk knows more than I do about cross-cultural psychology. But my first scholarly paper was why we need in India a management model which goes beyond American and Japanese models, because these were the two models available at that time. I will not go into the details of the differences. This is now well established. And a survey of cross-cultural studies in management also told me, when I did a meta-analysis, that there are 3 countries in the world which don't fit into any groupings of nations. And Professor Bhavuk can correct me. These 3 countries are, Japan was the first one recognized. An interesting one is Israel, which is not a very prominent country in cross-cultural management research, but wherever it has been taken, it comes out as a unique country, and we can see it as a unique place. And third is India. These are 3 countries which seem to not fit in any groupings of cultures consistently from the cross-cultural management point of view. So that means we need to think on our own to decide what is relevant for us. So these are the 2 major factors why we need, and so that is where I have used the indigenous word for myself as Professor Bhavuk uses. Of course, it led to something very funny. I don't have time to tell that. Now I come to one issue which has preoccupied me for last 30 years. And so far as I see, I know only Professor Bhavuk and Professor Pandey who are really taking that issue seriously, which is that you have to have, you see, all explicit scholarly knowledge is always in conceptual terms. The imperial model of research, the colonial model of research has been West produces theory, we produce data for them whenever they want to look at us. We have to reverse this. We have to create our own concepts and theories. Now, Professor Mahadevan and Professor Bhavuk have pointed out, and I agree with them, that we have an immensely rich resource of constructs and concepts and theories in our Vedic scriptures and even Buddhist scriptures. I have very little knowledge of Jainism. I won't say anything about that. So that is one track of research which we need to do. There, my position is of a deductive scientist. And if you allow me to use Popper here, while as a person, I have a personal Shraddha for Vedic tradition, as a scholar, I can only treat those constructs and theories as conjectures. And as a scholar, it is my responsibility to really put them to rigorous test. So that is what needs to be done. And all I can say is that perhaps more than 90% of the research which is happening in India using those ideas is very poor and not rigorous at all. It will not take us anywhere. If we want to take that track, we have to be very rigorous in operationalizing those constructs as Professor Bhavuk is doing, and then really making rigorous studies to the extent possible, experimental studies, but if not possible, very rigorous survey studies. We also need to put our scriptural theories and constructs, contrast them, compare them with the Western constructs and theories, and try to see which explains better, which works better for which purpose. We need to do that as scholars of the first kind. Just another kind of scholarship that is needed, which has not been talked about so far by any panelists, is what I call, and which has now become very popular, ground up research, which can be called grounded theory building. And I think that is as important as the first stream, and in some ways more important. One of the problems with our scriptural knowledge is that our socialization has put us so far away from our scriptural heritage that it is daunting for most youngsters who have gone through the Macaulay system of education, as you and I have gone through, to appreciate, to understand. And most of us don't seem to have time and resource to really go into that stream. So we need another stream of research which starts from what the reality is today, not what it could be. And that is where I believe we need to do grounded theory research. We need to allow our imagination. Here I have, apart from the methods which Professor Bhavuk has talked about, which are all very important, I think one thing which I learned from a British philosopher of science, Michael Polanyi, who gave this concept of a tacit knowledge, which has become so popular in management literature. He says that a good scientist, I'm using his word, a good scientist dwells in the phenomenon. Dwells in the phenomenon. And Michael Polanyi was a chemistry researcher. Now imagine he's talking of dwelling in the phenomenon. I realized, what happened to Kekule, who gave the benzene ring. I mean, he was really dwelling in that. The metaphors came into his dream. That is what dwelling is. Actually, for social scientists, it is a bit simpler. And we can learn from anthropologists who dwell in the culture which they want to understand. So it is very important for a scholar to spend enough time in the phenomenon he or she is trying to understand. And I have always insisted on my scholars that while they are preparing their proposal, they should spend half the time in the library and the journals, and half the time in the field. And they should constantly pitch what is written in the books and journals and the reality that they see and hear and listen to managers. And through this dialectical process, they should come up to their research question. So to me, that is a method I would like to add to Professor Bhavuk's list, a kind of an immersion process. And fortunately, I must mention a few, I don't know the time, I don't want to, I must mention a few examples of the work already done in developing our own constructs, apart from getting them from scriptures. I have been lucky to be a student of Professor Uday Parekh, who gave a very important extension to McClelland's theory of motivation, which never gets a mention in any book. Or I also hold Professor J.B.P. Sinha as my mentor, though he never taught me a course, but he has always been my inspiration. He said when he accepted the INDAM Lifetime Achievement Award, he said, I did not need to go to research journals to identify my research problem. I found it on the banks of the Ganges in Patna. So Professor Sinha gave the most beautiful concept of leadership, which I believe is not only valid for India, which I have tested through my students' research, but I do believe it has a big contribution to make to the global knowledge of management. Then I would like to say that my own students, I have been so lucky to have students who worked in both the streams. Professor Ashish Pandey was my first, the student who took courage to explore the ideas of Swadharma and that Lok Sangrah to understand the spiritual climate in organizations. Another student of mine, Puneet Bindlish, who is now in Holland, he conceptualized leadership purely from a scriptural point of view. Himanshu Dhaka, who is currently working in L&T, he looked at the Buddhist tradition because he's a practitioner of Buddhism. And he tried to introduce the dimension of ethics to the mindfulness, because Western scholarship has largely ignored the ethical dimensions of Buddhist practice and focused only on a kind of a empty mindfulness. So I have been lucky to have these students, and Puneet Bindlish himself has developed a model of how a researcher who wants to research in this tradition, scriptural tradition, must live the scriptural lifestyle, must immerse himself or herself in that way of life, and then try to understand the contemporary management realities and only then theorize. Now, coming to the second stream, which is ground up research on the realities as they are. And it is so extremely important because this will make sense to every manager. We are theorizing his or her reality. We are making sense to him or her. Only if we can show that we understand their reality. And that requires ground up research. And there's a strong tradition. The whole lot of research agenda I could talk about. I don't have time, but my student Anjan Roy, who is now teaching in NIBM, developed a model of knowledge creation in an Indian firm. Kapil Dev, who looked at the role of CIO in Indian companies, absolutely brilliant piece of work. And many others, T.T. Niranjan, who is teaching in IIT Bombay, who developed a very interesting concept for supply chain management, questioning some of the established models. So it is possible. My students have done it. I can't claim what they have done, but I feel proud that I could provide them an umbrella. And that is an important role for the senior faculty, to provide umbrella to young scholar who wants to venture into this very risky, thorny field of developing our own theories. That's very important. I've seen many senior faculty members crumble in the face of this challenge. That doesn't augur well. Anyway, so I think very little time. So let me now come to my punchline. Okay, which I would have said if you had said I have only 1 minute.
2 minutes. You have 2 minutes.
Okay, so let me tell my compatriots, Indian management scholars, and here I am echoing Karl Marx. Of course, Karl Marx may have done very bad things about thinking about India, but I also said some very meaningful things. So let me echo Karl Marx and say, my dear Indian management scholars and management scholars on India across the world, you have nothing to lose but your status as a third class scholar, or if I put it politely, a third world scholar. So the choice is yours, whether you want to remain in the chains of Western intellectual traditions, or you want to stand on your own. That's up to you. All I can say is, as has been demonstrated by Mahadevan professor and Professor Bhavuk and my students, that it is possible to do. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ramya. Thank you very much.
We have just exactly 15 minutes left before the Zoom session ends. So I'm just going to take two questions from the chat and no, from the audience. Professor Ashish Pandey will be giving the concluding remarks. So I'm going to take this question from Sumit Arora first, because he put it right up front. Is it me versus them, or is it me and them? By the way, who stops the pluriversal thought process? Why are we saying colonization of knowledge? Is there a European theory? If there is a European theory, it is always open to falsification. We can always falsify the existing one towards a new or a better one. If it has to be falsified using Indian knowledge, try. Who's stopping us? What is the objective of this discussion? And he's posing this challenge, saying that why do we, in a local world, why do we really need something that's Indian management or Japanese management or different kinds of knowledge systems? So it's a devil's advocate question. So I'd request any one of the panelists to answer that one.
Given the shortage of time, I think let me shoot. And if anyone, Sumit Arora, all I wish to tell you, Sumit, forget what we have said. Forget what we have said. Do something. Whichever way you want to do it. Start from Euro, come to India, start from India, go to Euro, or make your own path. There's nothing more needs to be said in response to this comment, in my view.
Any questions from the audience in the classroom?
Can I say something to that Sumit Arora's question? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Sumitji, it's easy to say why do we need, it's easy to say we are connected and basically run with Western ideas, theory, lifestyle, and everything else. So we actually need to do a lot more than we are doing to first become culturally sensitive to everybody and then kind of start putting our own knowledge system for testing. It's not going to happen in my lifetime. I'm 66 and I plan to live another 66 years, but I still don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime. Because there is a sociology of knowledge creation, and it's easy for people to just do what pays. I mean, look at all the IIMs. They want Western ranking. Why do they really need Western ranking? And if you are going to get Western ranking, you'll have to publish Western stuff in Western style. So you fall into that how many journals are there in India and how many journals are there in America, and how do you rank them? And so it's not an it's not an even play field. It is really hard to come up with a local idea and compete with the dominant Western idea and models and brands, and that also applies to education. So it's really, on the surface it may look like we are making a dent, but we are actually not making a dent. I teach at an American university, that a business school that specializes in international management, but still we are Western centric, Eurocentric. We are not open to knowledge from other parts of the world. And if you look at the population of the world, as Dr. Triandi said, 1% of the population is dominating their ideas or presenting their ideas as universal. That doesn't apply to 99%. You look at China, look at India, we got 2/5 of the world population, and our cultures don't quite fit with the Western culture. Our value system don't fit. So I think it's a long journey, and I'll continue. I'll be happy to have a dialogue with you one-on-one, beyond this symposium. But we have more to do than less, actually.
I think we just have enough time for the concluding remarks. Shan Turnbull, I know you had some questions on the chat. Maybe we'll try and take it offline. So may I invite Professor Ashish Pandey to come over and give the concluding remarks and share his perspective of the session with us. We also invite further conversations, not only through engaging with us, but also as potential articles for the decision journal on the topic of Indigenous Indian management. And please do get in touch with us if you have serious inputs to make towards this. So Ashish, please come over.
So, thanks very much. Good, it is not showing. We'll stop sharing.
So Professor Ashish Pandey is Associate Professor at the Shailesh Mehta School of Management from IIT Bombay.
Okay. Secondly, of course, I'm the student of Professor Rajan Gupta, whom you have already heard. My own work has taken me through the spiritual climate, then yoga and positive psychology, then now organization and social healing. All these are kind of published works. And just I wish to share with the young scholars who are present here, even with this kind of work, when you integrate the Western and the Indian traditional wisdom, you can publish. So I have like 5, 6 FT50 and all that. You can get jobs, get promotion. So this is possible if you do it. So in a way, I agree to Professor, I think Mr. Arora, that nobody is stopping. It is only us who is stopping to take forward this agenda and pursue that with the full rigor. If you say, what is the essence of Indian management? And this is not a concluding remark. These all are the great scholars whom listening to them and reading their papers and cases, I have kind of thus far carried on. But this is like my take as their student. If we look at what are the basis, the Indian, we all studied in India, there are 3 foundations or 3 pillars of the Indian democracy. What is that? Judiciary, legislature, and executive. That's what we say. These are the 3 pillars of the Indian democracy. If you look at the Supreme Court, which is the icon of which is the topmost kind of stage of the judiciary, what is the punchline they follow? What is their Dhyeya Shlok? Yatas Dharmo Tatas Jaya. What is the legislature? The Lok Sabha is the pinnacle of the legislature. What is written in the main hall, right above the speaker's chair, is Dharmachakra Pravartanaya. So that is legislature. And executive, the IAS officers, the executive is the third pillar. And what is the Dheya Vakya for them? Yoga Karmushu Kosha. So if you say, what is the sense of the Indian management? It is Dharma, which is the closest translation of Dharma is sustainability, and Yoga, which is realizing the limitless self, which is bound somehow in the limited self. What Professor S.K. Chakravarti used to say, self with the small s and self with the capital S. So, if you look at the work of all these scholars, you get a good idea how to carry out this kind of work, this kind of research. Since we are sitting in the Indian Academy of Management, and I'm glad Professor Mishra is here, and two Mishras are here, who are like organizing this, and this is Indian Management Academy. Why can't we decide to give enough attention to the scholarship which is based on the indigenous knowledge? And for that, probably we have to consider B journal as A's for if we are publishing the indigenous constructs. We can give some kind of positive action to encourage the young scholars. There is by rigorous work, by good guidance, people can do things which is good for the publication, which can lead them to the recruitment and the promotion. But at the same time, no school of thought has developed without sufficient structural support. So I think INDAM is the place where we can talk about giving some structural support, recognizing the papers, development of the constructs, even if it is not reaching to FT50, even if it is not reaching to A, if it is a serious comment. And that is the whole essence of collegiality. What is the meaning of review process? What is the meaning of collegiality? When we are totally dependent on the ranking by some other external agency. Total reliance on the external agency is nothing but indicating our own lack of confidence in evaluating the quality of the work of our colleagues. So let us take responsibility and develop and regain the confidence of doing this kind of work, and also with the sense of collegiality evaluating it. Then it may not reach to the A star A, it may reach to A, it may reach to B, but that will encourage the scholar and scholarship. So this kind of invitation and request, this is my concluding words. Thanks very much, Ramya, for organizing this, and INDAM for hosting this.
Thank you so very much, everyone. And my special thanks to Dr. Sayantan Kandra, to Deepika and Nidhi in this room who took care of all the logistics, along with Nihal, right? And yourself who you have just joined. Your good name? Richa. Thank you, Richa. Thank you so much to the INDAM organizers. Thank you so much, Professor Sushant Mishra. Thank you so much, Professor Prashant Mishra. Thank you to all the to Professor Ashish Sharma. Thank you so much, everyone, all the panelists. It was a wonderful discussion. We are hoping that we can take this conversation forward. I'm going to save the chat transcript and share it with the panelists so that we can follow up on these conversations. It's been a wonderful discussion, and thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.